She had been on her feet for 14 hours when the man raised his hand. It was 9:17 p.m. on a Thursday in November, and the corridors of St. Agatha's Private Medical Center in East Legon were the kind of quiet that only exists in places where money has replaced noise. The linoleum gleamed under the white overhead lights. The air smelled of lavender disinfectant and something colder underneath it. Nurse Adaise Okafor was 31 years old, 7 months pregnant, wearing a uniform that had been washed so many times the blue had faded to the color of old sky. Her shift had started at 7 that morning. She had not eaten since noon. Her ankles were swollen inside her shoes, and she had learned months ago not to think about it. She was crossing the main reception lobby carrying a patient file, walking with the careful, measured pace of someone who has learned to move efficiently when her body is telling her to stop, when she heard the voice before she saw the man. "Is anyone in this building actually competent, or are you all here for decoration?" His name was Gerald Nkemdirim Osagai, and he was 54 years old, and he had built his fortune in telecommunications infrastructure across 4 West African countries in 11 years, and he spoke in the manner of a man who had not waited for anything in a very long time. He was standing at the reception desk in a gray linen suit that had probably cost more than Adaise made in 3 months, one hand flat on the counter, the other holding a phone he was no longer looking at because he had directed his attention to the receptionist, a young woman named Pauline, who was 22 and doing her best. Adaise kept walking. She was not involved in this. It was not her desk. She had 4 files to deliver and a patient in room 14 who needed a blood pressure check before the night nurse came on. She kept her eyes forward. She heard Pauline say something apologetic. She heard Osagai's voice rise another register. "I don't want an apology. I want to know why my wife's private room has not been set up. We were told it would be ready by 8. It is past 9. I have called twice. Nobody has called back. I want to speak to someone who is actually in charge of something." Adaise had almost passed through the double doors when she stopped. She turned around. She walked back to the desk, not because it was her job, not because she was assigned to reception, but because Pauline had the look of someone drowning 3 feet from the edge of a pool, and because 14 hours into a shift there is a point where you stop calculating and simply act. "Sir," she said, her voice even. "I'm Nurse Okafor. Can I help you locate the situation with your wife's room?" Gerald Osagai looked at her. He looked at her the way certain men look at people they have already categorized. A rapid assessment that starts at the shoes, moves upward, registers the uniform, the pregnancy, the worn fabric, and arrives at a conclusion before a single word has been exchanged. "You're a nurse," he said. It was not a question. It was a reclassification. "Yes, sir, then you don't run rooms. Go back to whatever you were doing." "The ward coordinator's office is 2 floors up," she said. "If your wife's room hasn't been prepared, it's likely a scheduling issue that can be resolved in under 10 minutes if we contact them now. Would you like me to make that call for you?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at her stomach. Then he said, "What I'd like is for the staff here to do their jobs without patients' families having to chase them down. How long have you been on shift?" She paused 1 beat. "Since 7 this morning." "And you look it," he said. "Go home. You clearly shouldn't be here in your condition. You're a liability." The lobby was not empty. There were 2 men in suits near the door. Pauline behind the desk, a security guard 30 feet away who had heard everything and chosen to study the floor. Adaise said, "I'll make that call now, sir." She reached for the desk phone. That was when his hand came up, not to strike, not a full swing, but a sharp, dismissive slap to the back of her hand against the phone receiver. The kind of slap that men who have never faced consequences perform without thinking. A swat. A correction. The way you'd move a child's hand from something they shouldn't touch. The receiver clattered against the cradle. Adaize did not move for 2 full seconds. She felt the sting spread across the back of her hand. She felt her heart rate go up. She felt, beneath everything else, the particular stillness that comes when you have decided not to react in the way the moment is demanding. Gerald Osagai straightened his jacket. He looked at her with the mild irritation of someone who has ended a conversation. Then, he turned to Pauline and said, "I'll speak to someone with actual authority," and he walked toward the elevator and pressed the button, and the doors opened immediately, as though the building too was accommodating him, and he stepped inside, and the doors closed, and he was gone. In the lobby, nobody moved. Pauline looked at Adaize with an expression that contained an apology she did not have the vocabulary for. The security guard had found something important on the ceiling. The men near the door were examining their phones. Adaize picked up the receiver. She made the call to the ward coordinator. She explained the situation in 30 seconds. The room, she was told, had been ready since 8:45, but the signaling system in that wing had a recurring fault, the 3rd time this month, and the reception desk hadn't been updated. She thanked the coordinator, hung up, wrote down the room number on a notepad, tore it from the pad, and handed it to Pauline. "Room 312, she said. "Tell him when he comes back down." She picked up her files and walked through the double doors. She did not cry until she reached the medication storage room on the 3rd floor, and even then it was not a collapse. It was 45 seconds, with her back against the wall and her hand pressed flat against her stomach, where she could feel the baby moving, small and certain, and she breathed through it the way she breathed through everything, which was steadily, which was without permission from anyone. She had learned this at 19. She was still learning it now. What Adaize Okafor had not mentioned to Gerald Osakai, and would not have mentioned even if he had given her the space to speak, was that she was 7 months pregnant and 14 hours into a shift because she had taken on the overtime voluntarily. Not because she needed the money, though she did. Her daughter was 3 and in nursery school, and the fees had gone up in September. She had taken the overtime because a colleague named Comfort had asked her to cover, and Adaize had said yes before she finished the question. This is the thing about people who were raised to believe that their value lived in what they gave. They give past the point of sense, and they do not talk about it. What she also had not mentioned was that her late husband, Dr. Tobena Okafor, had been on the board of St. Agatha's Medical Center from the year it opened until his death 4 years ago. He had co-signed the original funding proposal. His name was on a small plaque in the hospital chapel on the ground floor that most of the current staff had never read, because it was positioned behind the 2nd row of chairs. Tobena had died at 33, 16 months before their daughter was born, from a cardiac event so sudden that the hospital he had helped build was the one that failed to save him. He had been one of St. Agatha's own. None of this was visible in Adaize's shoes or her faded uniform or the way she stood at reception desks asking if she could help. None of it would have changed anything tonight. Or so Gerald Osagai believed. He came down from the 3rd floor at 10:04 p.m. His wife, it turned out, had been settled comfortably in room 312 for over an hour and was in considerably better spirits than her husband. He had, in the space of 60 minutes, spoken to the ward matron, complained about the elevator response time, and requested a different pillow configuration for the room. He was, in the way of certain powerful men, loudest when things were already resolved. He was crossing the lobby when he nearly walked into the woman waiting near the reception desk. She was perhaps 67 years old. She wore a traditional kente print blouse in green and gold, and she carried herself with the particular quality of someone who has never needed a room to announce her. Her name was Dr. Nana Owusu Boateng. She had been the director of medical ethics at Korle-Bu Teaching Hospital for 11 years and was currently 3 months into her appointment as chair of the board of St. Agatha's private medical center, having been recruited specifically to address a series of patient dignity violations that had surfaced in an internal audit the previous quarter. She was here tonight for a board member walkthrough, unscheduled, which was her preference. She had arrived 11 minutes ago. She had been in the lobby for 9 of those minutes. She had seen everything. Gerald Osage recognized her 2 seconds after making eye contact, which was 2 seconds too late to recalibrate his expression. He knew who she was. He had sat across from her at a gala in Cantonments 3 years ago. He had, if he was being precise, tried to recruit her organization for a CSR partnership that she had declined with a brevity that still faintly irritated him. Dr. Owusu Boateng, he said, and his voice had changed register entirely. Mr. Osage, she said. I need you to come with me, please. The please was not a courtesy. It was an instruction wearing a courtesy's clothes. He followed her to a conference room off the main corridor. The room had a long table and 6 chairs, and a window that looked onto the hospital's internal courtyard, where a single outdoor light illuminated a garden that nobody seemed to use. She sat at the head of the table. She did not gesture to a chair. She said, I am going to describe what I observed in this lobby this evening, and then I would like you to tell me if my description is accurate. He started to speak. She continued. A pregnant nurse, 14 hours into her shift, attempted to assist your interaction with reception staff. You told her she was a liability and that she should go home. She persisted in attempting to help you. You struck her hand against the desk telephone. You then walked to the elevator. At no point did you wait to see if she was injured. You were smiling when the elevator doors closed. The room was very quiet. Was my description accurate? Gerald Osage had survived 11 years of high-stakes business by understanding the architecture of rooms. He understood the architecture of this one. He said, it was a reaction. I didn't intend. The nurse's name, Dr. Owusu Boateng said, is Adeze Okafor. She has worked at this facility for 6 years. Her performance record is the highest in her ward. She is currently working an overtime shift as a voluntary favor to a colleague. She paused. Her husband, Dr. Tobena Okafor, helped build this hospital. His name is on the chapel wall behind the second row of chairs. He died here. This is also his hospital. Gerald Osage said nothing. She has not filed a complaint, Dr. Owusu Boateng said. She will not file a complaint. Because in my experience, people like Nurse Okafor do not file complaints. They absorb. They continue. They give their overtime voluntarily, and they make phone calls on behalf of the families of patients who treat them with contempt, and they go home to their children, and they do not say anything about it. This is what I find most unacceptable. She opened a folder on the table that he had not noticed when he walked in. She removed a single sheet of paper. St. Agatha's has a zero-tolerance patient and visitor conduct policy that was updated 4 months ago following our internal audit. A physical altercation with a staff member, regardless of severity, falls under Clause 7. It requires immediate documentation, an incident report filed with the Medical and Dental Council, and notification sent to any business entity connected to the individual involved. She laid the sheet on the table. You are currently in preliminary discussions with this hospital's parent company regarding a telecommunications infrastructure contract for 3 of their West African facilities. That is a matter of public record, because it was listed in the minutes of last month's board meeting, which I chair. She looked at him steadily. The board will receive notification of tonight's incident by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. What happens after that is a board determination, not mine alone. But I want you to understand what your evening has cost before the process begins, rather than after. Gerald Osagai was a man who had spent 30 years knowing how rooms worked. He sat in this one and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that a room knew how he worked. He said, "I would like to apologize to the nurse." Dr. Owusu Boateng said, "I know. That is also noted." She stood. "I will arrange it. You will not approach her directly or without me present. That is not a request." She left the folder on the table and walked out of the room. At 10:51 p.m., in the break room on the third floor, Adaize Okafor was eating a boiled egg and a piece of bread that someone had left for her. She suspected Comfort, who sent apology food when she could not send anything else. When Dr. Owusu Boateng knocked once and opened the door, she explained in 3 sentences what had happened in the conference room below. Adaize listened. She looked down at the bread in her hand. She looked back up. "He doesn't need to apologize to me," she said. "I know, Doctor," Owusu Boateng said, "but I need him to." She sat across from Adaize. The 2 women looked at each other. Outside the window, the hospital's generator hummed at its nighttime frequency, steady and low. "Your husband's name, Doctor," Owusu Boateng said. "I met Tobena once. In 2018, at a medical governance conference in Abuja. He was the youngest person presenting, and the only one who made the room laugh twice. I remembered him when I read the donor wall." Adaize's face did not move very much, but something in it settled. "He made rooms laugh," she said. "He could not help it." They were quiet for a moment. "How much longer tonight, Doctor?" Owusu Boateng asked. "I'm off at midnight. I'll wait." She did. At midnight and 17 minutes, Adaize Okafor walked out of St. Agatha's Medical Center. The November air had dropped 7 degrees since her shift began. She had her coat on and her bag over one shoulder, and she walked with the careful pace of a woman who is 9 weeks from the end of a pregnancy and 14 hours from the beginning of a shift, and still upright, still moving forward, because the alternative has never been an option she was willing to take. The following morning, at 9:03 a.m., the board of St. Agatha's received Dr. Owusu Boateng's incident report. The telecommunications infrastructure discussion with Osagai's company was placed on hold pending board review. It would remain on hold for 4 months. When it resumed, the contract terms had been renegotiated by a different representative from his company. Gerald Osagai did not attend those meetings. At 9:47 a.m., he appeared with Dr. Owusu Boateng at the nursing station on the 3rd floor. He was not in the linen suit. He stood in front of Adaize Okafor, and he said the words he had been rehearsing since the conference room, and they came out smaller than he intended, which was probably right. Adaize Okafor looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Do better for the next nurse who tries to help you." She turned back to her station. That was the end of it, for her. Not everything requires more than that. The baby came on the 14th of February at 6:22 in the morning, in the same hospital. She named him Tobena, because some names do not belong to the past. She was back at work in 11 weeks. The colleague she had covered for the night of the overtime brought her jollof rice and fried plantain every Friday for 2 months, without being asked. The break room on the 3rd floor acquired, over the following year, a small framed photograph of a man laughing at a conference, the kind of laugh that takes over a room, placed there by no one who admitted to it. The plaque in the chapel still sits behind the 2nd row of chairs. Most people never read it. Some people cannot walk past it. There is a kind of dignity that does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice when dismissed or straighten its back for the benefit of the room. It simply continues. It finishes the shift. It makes the call for the person who just humiliated it. It eats the boiled egg in the break room and goes back out into the corridor and keeps moving. Because there is always another patient, always another room, always something that needs doing. You have probably met someone like this. You may not have recognized them. That is the nature of this kind of person. They are not built to be recognized. They are built to hold things together in the places where the holding costs the most. The world tends to see what is wearing the expensive suit. It does not always see what is wearing the faded uniform. But what we cannot see does not stop being real. It simply keeps working, quietly, at the center of everything we would like to believe we have built ourselves. If someone dismissed you on what you later learned was the worst night of their life, and years later you understood what they had been carrying, would it change how you see them? And if it did change it, what would you actually do with that? Leave your answer below. And if these stories reach something real in you, subscribe. This channel exists to tell the stories the world forgets to remember. I'll see you in the next one.